The tray tilted. Time seemed to warp, slowing to a crawl as the crystal goblet slid, catching the candlelight in a final, glittering arc before they met the floor. The crash was a thunderclap in the suddenly silent hall. Dark red wine exploded outwards, soaking the pristine white fur cloak of a visiting and very powerful alpha. Cora froze, her breath catching in her throat. The world became a pinprick of focus. The spreading crimson stain, the sharp, acidic scent of spilled vintage mixing with the cloying perfume of the court. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, each one a needle of judgment. She had managed every detail of this banquet to perfection, and in one clumsy second, it had all turned to ash. "Oh, clumsy me," a voice purred beside her. Her sister, Cassia, the jewel of their family, placed a delicate hand on Cora's arm. The touch was meant to look like comfort, but her perfectly manicured nails dug in with malicious intent. "I'm so sorry, I must have stumbled." But Cora saw the triumphant smirk that Cassia barely bothered to hide. A hand, far stronger and crueler, seized her other arm. Lord Valerius, her father, yanked her forward. His face was a mask of cold fury, his public image shattered by his worthless daughter. He didn't speak to the insulted alpha. His rage was a laser beam focused solely on her. He leaned close, his breath hot and sour against her ear. His whisper was more brutal than any public tirade. "You are not just a disappointment. You are a liability. You fail at the one thing you were born for, to be useful." The words struck home, a familiar poison that paralyzed her from the inside out. All around her, the lords and ladies of the great packs watched, their faces a mixture of pity and contempt. She was the family's dirty secret, the servant daughter they couldn't quite hide away. She closed her eyes, a silent surrender. The public dragging, the screaming match behind closed doors, the days of cold silence. It was all coming. She braced herself for the inevitable pull, the final, crushing humiliation in a life built from it. But the pull never came. Instead, a silence fell over the hall, so deep and sudden it was like being plunged underwater. It wasn't the silence of shock. It was the silence of prey that has just scented a predator. The air grew heavy, cold. Every head turned, not to Cora, but to the high table where the great throne of the guest of honor now sat empty. He was standing right behind them. King Ronan. No one had seen him move. Taller than any man in the room, his shadow was a physical weight that fell over both Cora and her father. He said nothing. His stillness was more terrifying than any roar, a promise of violence held in perfect, chilling check. His golden eyes were fixed on Lord Valerius's hand, still clamped cruelly around Cora's arm. Blinded by his own fury, Valerius gave Cora another vicious shake. "You will pay for this humiliation." He was cut off by the sickening crack of bone. A large, scarred hand had closed around his wrist, and King Ronan squeezed. Valerius let out a choked gasp, his face draining of all color as the pressure increased, his fingers forced open. Ronan's voice was not loud, but it vibrated through the very floorboards, a low growl that was felt more than heard. "Let her go." It was a command that brooked no argument, forged by centuries of absolute rule. Valerius's hand dropped from Cora's arm as if it had been burned. He cradled his crushed wrist, his eyes wide with terror and disbelief. The king's gaze swept the room once, a silent warning that froze every guest in their seat. He then looked down at Cora, his expression unreadable. To Lord Valerius, he announced, his voice carrying with effortless authority. For the insult to my ally, and for this pathetic display you call hospitality, I claim compensation. His eyes flickered back to Cora. She comes with me. He didn't wait for an answer. There wasn't one to be given. Ronan gently took Cora's hand, his touch surprisingly careful on her bruised skin. He didn't pull or drag. He simply guided her, leading her away from her father, past her stunned sister and horrified mother, and straight through the parting sea of silent nobles. The great hall doors boomed shut behind them, an executioner's axe falling on her old life. The stone fortress was a world away from the gilded cage she'd just left. It wasn't opulent. It was ancient, solid, and emanated a quiet power that settled deep in her bones. King Ronan led her through cavernous halls, his two massive wolves, Skoll and Hati, padding silently at their heels. He didn't speak, and the silence was a balm after the screeching fury of her family. He stopped before a heavy oak door and pushed it open, revealing not a servant's cell, but a chamber fit for a queen. A fire roared in a stone hearth the size of a carriage, casting a warm golden glow over thick fur blankets piled on a massive bed. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke, clean and wild. It was the safest she had ever felt in her life. Ronan gestured to a small adjoining room, where steam rose from a deep copper tub. "You are safe here," he said, his voice a low rumble. "No one will harm you." He placed a small, unmarked jar on a nearby table. "For your arm. It will take away the bruising." He didn't touch her, didn't even step fully into the room. He gave her space, a gift more precious than any jewel. For a long moment, Cora simply stood there, overwhelmed. She had been conditioned to believe that kindness was a transaction, a down payment for a service required later. She stared at the jar, then at the warm, inviting room, her mind racing to calculate the debt she was incurring. What did he want from her? What task would she have to perform to earn this? The next day, she found him in a vast library that doubled as a war room. He stood over a massive table, scowling at a map detailing troop movements and supply lines. His commanders stood by, silent and grim. Cora, unable to remain idle, had intended only to bring a tray of water, a familiar and comforting task. But her eyes were drawn to the map. She saw it instantly. A fatal flaw in the logistics. A supply route that was overextended, leaving the entire western flank vulnerable to a pincer attack. It was a simple oversight, the kind men of action often made, but it could cost thousands of lives. She froze, the water pitcher trembling in her hands. To speak would be an unthinkable presumption. To stay silent felt like a betrayal. Ronan looked up, his golden eyes locking onto hers. He saw not a timid servant, but the intense focus in her gaze. He followed her line of sight to the map. "You see something," he stated, not a question, but a fact. His voice was quiet, yet it cut through the tension in the room. "Tell me." Her breath hitched. Her father would have backhanded her for such audacity. But the king's gaze was steady, patient, and genuinely curious. Hesitantly, she pointed a trembling finger. "The grain shipments for the western garrison," she whispered. "They have to travel through the Serpent's Pass, but the winter convoys are too slow. Your men will run out of supplies a week before the reinforcements arrive." A stunned silence fell over the room. One of the commanders started to scoff, but Ronan raised a hand, silencing him instantly. He stared at the map, his eyes widening in dawning realization. He traced the route she had indicated, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked back at her, and for the first time, she saw something other than regal authority in his eyes. It was awe, pure, unadulterated admiration. He hadn't just heard her words. He had seen the intricate, lightning-fast calculations of her mind. "For 10 years, my best strategists have overlooked that," he said, his voice laced with wonder. "You saw it in 10 seconds. He took a step closer, his sheer size normally intimidating, but now it felt like a shield. He didn't praise her for being useful. He didn't thank her for her service. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and validated the one part of herself she had been taught to hide. "Your mind," he said, his voice a reverent whisper that was for her alone, "is the sharpest weapon in this entire fortress." The arrival of her family was announced not with trumpets, but with a cold dread that seized Cora's heart. Lord Valerius, Lady Isolde, and her sister Cassia were escorted into the great hall, their faces masks of greedy ambition. Cora felt an instinctual urge to shrink, to become the invisible servant once more. But Ronan's presence beside her was a warm, solid anchor. Lord Valerius bowed, a gesture dripping with false deference. "King Ronan," he began, his voice oily, "we have come to correct a misunderstanding. You took our simpler daughter out of a sense of duty, we understand. We now offer you a true match." He gestured grandly to Cassia, who preened like a prize peacock. "A bride of pure blood and beauty, fit to be your queen." Lady Isolde stepped forward, her gaze sliding over Cora with disdain. "Cora has her uses, of course," she said, her voice a silken insult. "She is an excellent household manager. But a kingdom requires more than clean floors. It requires grace, lineage, things she simply does not possess." Then they turned on her. "Cora," her father commanded, his voice laced with the old familiar threat. "Do your duty to this family. Tell the king to accept our generous offer. Persuade him." They were not asking. They were ordering the tool they believed they still owned. A hush fell over the court. All eyes were on Cora, waiting for the inevitable, cowering obedience. But something had fundamentally shifted within her. She met her father's gaze, and for the first time in her life, she did not look away. She lifted her chin, her silence a rebellion louder than any shout. A growl, low and guttural as shifting tectonic plates, vibrated from Ronan's chest. The air grew frigid. He rose from his throne, not with the speed of anger, but with the deliberate, terrifying calm of an executioner. The room held its breath. He ignored her stunned family, his golden eyes fixed only on Cora. He walked to her, a predator shielding his most precious possession. He gently took her hand, his thumb stroking over her knuckles, before he pulled her to stand at his side, facing her tormentors as a united front. "You dare," Ronan's voice was a blade of ice, "to walk into my home and offer me glittering glass when the most priceless diamond already resides under my roof." He looked at Valerius with utter contempt. "You speak of lineage, yet you failed to recognize the strength in your own blood. You speak of beauty, yet you are blind to the brilliance of a mind that sees what your entire pack has missed for generations." He then turned to Cora, his expression softening, his voice a reverent rumble meant only for her and the silent witnesses. I do not need a pretty, pliant queen. I need a queen whose mind is a fortress, a queen whose loyalty is unbreakable. I need you. He lowered his head, inhaling her scent at the crook of her neck, the ultimate public Lycan claim. He faced her family one last time, his voice booming with absolute finality. Cora is not your tool. She is not your servant. He pulled her flush against his side, a possessive arm wrapping around her waist. She is my mate, my queen. And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of his body and the unshakable truth in his words, Cora finally believed it. She placed her hand on his chest, over his heart, claiming him back as the entire court bore witness to the fall of House Valerius. A month passed in a blur of peace she had never known. The crushing weight on Cora's chest had finally lifted, replaced by the steady warmth of Ronan's presence. She learned to laugh without looking over her shoulder, to speak her mind without fear of retribution. For the first time, she was not a tool or a liability. She was simply Cora, and she was loved. The fortress had become a home. The king had become her world. The illusion of safety shattered with a single panicked knock on the throne room door. A young guard burst in, his face pale. "Your Majesty," he stammered, his eyes darting to Cora with pity. "A caravan has arrived at the gates. They carry the banner of House Valerius. They demand an audience." The names were an incantation, summoning all the ghosts she had just managed to escape. Her blood ran cold. They were ushered in not as nobles, but as beggars. Their fine clothes were travel-stained, their faces etched with a desperate, venomous hunger. Lord Valerius fell to his knees, a theatrical display of submission that turned her stomach. "King Ronan," he cried, his voice ringing with false sincerity. "We have seen the error of our ways. We have come to beg forgiveness and to reclaim our daughter." "You have no daughter here," Ronan growled, his hand instinctively finding the small of Cora's back, a silent shield. Cassia stepped forward, her beauty curdled by spite. "He's right," she sneered, dropping the act. "We don't want the broken toy back. We're here to offer you a choice, Cora." She unveiled their true, horrifying purpose. They had forged an alliance with the savage Shadowfang pack, Ronan's most bitter rival. The price of that alliance? Cash's hand in marriage, and Cora's public renunciation of Ronan to sow discord among his allies. "You will come with us," her mother Isolde hissed, her voice a serpent's whisper. "You will tell the council you were held against your will. If you refuse, our new allies will see it as a declaration of war. The blood of this entire kingdom will be on your hands. Your choice is simple: your happiness or their lives." It was the same trap, the same poison. Her duty was to sacrifice herself. But as Cora looked at her family, she felt no fear, only a cold, clear pity. She saw not a threat, but a pathetic, failing gambit. She turned to Ronan, whose golden eyes held no doubt, only absolute faith in her. She drew strength from it, a steel spine forged in his love. She faced her tormentors, and for the first time she spoke not as a victim, but as a queen. "There is no choice," she said, her voice clear and ringing with authority. "Only a miscalculation. You allied yourselves with a dying pack, offered them a bride they don't want, and threatened a kingdom you cannot possibly scratch. You have nothing. You are nothing. With a few sharp sentences, she publicly dismantled their strategy, exposing it as the desperate, foolish ploy it was. The crisis was over before it began. A profound silence followed Cora's words, thicker and heavier than any stone in the fortress. Her family stood frozen, their pathetic scheme dismantled and laid bare by the very tool they had come to wield. A low sound rumbled through the hall, a vibration that came not from the earth, but from the king's chest. It was the sound of a landslide beginning, of an ancient power stirring. Ronan's golden eyes burned with a pride so fierce it was terrifying, and a fury so cold it promised oblivion. He rose from his throne, not with haste, but with the deliberate, inexorable weight of destiny itself, and walked to stand beside Cora, a living wall of iron and rage between her and her past. He did not look at Cora. His gaze was locked on Lord Valerius, a predator fixing its eyes on prey. "You dare." Ronan's voice was a blade of ice, each word a killing blow. "You dare to walk into my home, into my court, and offer me glittering glass when the most priceless diamond in this world already stands under my roof." He gestured dismissively at Cassia, who flinched as if struck. "You speak of bloodlines, yet you are blind to the strength in your own. You speak of worth, yet you tried to trade a fortress for a doll." His contemptuous gaze swept over Lady Isolde. "You believe a kingdom is run on grace and pretty smiles? This kingdom was forged in blood and held by strategy. The queen it requires is not one who can host a banquet, but one who can plan a war." He looked back at Cora, his expression softening for a fraction of a second before hardening again as he faced her family. "You saw a servant. I see a mind that will secure my legacy for 1,000 years. You discarded her. I will build an empire around her." Then he turned to Cora, the entire world narrowing to the space between them. The icy rage in his eyes melted away, replaced by a reverence so profound it made her breath catch. He gently took her hand, his touch a promise. "I do not need a pliant queen," he said, his voice a low rumble meant only for her, yet heard by all. "I need a queen whose mind is a weapon, whose loyalty is an unbreakable shield. I need you." He lowered his head, pressing his face into the crook of her neck, inhaling her scent in the ultimate, public Lycan claim that sealed their bond before gods and men. Lifting his head, he pulled her flush against his side, a possessive arm wrapping around her waist as he faced her shattered family one last time. His voice boomed with absolute finality, an edict that would echo through the ages. "Cora is not your tool. She is not your daughter." He looked down at her, his golden eyes blazing with adoration. "She is my mate, my queen, and you are nothing." He flicked his hand toward the guards. "Remove them. Their name is to be struck from every record. Their house is to be forgotten." As her family was dragged away, not as nobles but as refuse, Cora leaned into Ronan's strength, the last chains of her old life turning to dust. She was home. The wedding was not a grand affair of state, but a solemn vow made under the ancient heartwood tree in the center of the fortress. Cora wore no crown of gold, but one of woven winter roses, their thorns a reminder of the pain she had overcome. As Ronan slid a simple iron ring onto her finger, he did not speak of love or passion. He spoke of partnership, of respect, of the unshakable foundation they would build together. And as she met his golden gaze, She felt not the anxiety of a servant accepting a gift she hadn't earned, but the quiet, powerful certainty of a queen claiming her throne. Years passed, flowing like a peaceful river after a lifetime in a storm. Queen Cora became a name spoken with reverence and awe across the lands. Her strategies didn't just win wars, they prevented them. Her logistical genius ended famines, opened new trade routes, and brought an era of unprecedented prosperity. She moved through the court with a calm authority, her voice never needing to be raised, for her words carried the weight of wisdom. The shy, trembling girl who spilled wine was a ghost, a memory replaced by the woman who now held the fate of a kingdom in her capable hands. Ronan never stopped looking at her as if she were a miracle. He would find her in the war room, her brow furrowed in concentration over a map, and the fierce Lycan king would soften, his heart swelling with a pride that was almost painful. He never saw a tool or an asset. He saw the brilliant, resilient woman who had saved his kingdom by simply being herself. He saw the mate who had taught his ancient, battle-weary heart how to be gentle. Their love was not a raging fire, but the deep, abiding warmth of a hearth that would never go cold. Their legacy was not just in their peace, but in the children they raised. A son with his father's strength and his mother's sharp, observant eyes. A daughter with a laugh that echoed through the stone halls, and a mind that could solve any puzzle put before her. Cora taught them not of duty, but of dignity. She taught them that true strength was not in commanding others, but in recognizing the value within them. A lesson she had learned in the cruelest of ways, and now championed with the purest of hearts. News of her former family came rarely, like whispers of a forgotten tale. They were no longer Lord and Lady Valerius. They were simply Valerius and Isolde, a name synonymous with foolishness and disgrace. Their pack had disowned them, their lands and titles stripped away by a council of alphas who were shamed by their blindness. Their vast manor was sold to pay off debts, and they were forced into a small, damp cottage on the forgotten fringes of the territory they once ruled. Lord Valerius, who once commanded armies, was reduced to begging for work from men he once looked down upon. His pride, the only thing he had ever truly valued, was shattered into a million pieces. He spent his days in a bitter, silent rage, staring at the hands that once held power and now only held debt and regret. Lady Isolde, whose life had been a tapestry of silks and jewels, now wore threadbare wool, her hands raw from scrubbing her own floors. Her sharp tongue was silenced, for there was no one left to listen to her venom. The cruelest fate was reserved for Cassia. The jewel of the family, the prize peacock, found herself worthless on the marriage market. Her beauty was tainted by her family's ruin, her name a laughingstock. She grew bitter and haggard, the pretty, glittering glass the king had spoken of, now shattered and dull. She lived out her days in lonely obscurity, forever haunted by the shadow of the sister she had tried to break, the sister who now ruled as a beloved queen. They had tried to trade a fortress for a doll, and in the end, they were left with nothing but dust and echoes. The invisible pillar that had once propped up their hollow house had become the unshakable foundation of an empire. What they had dismissed as a servant's duty, he had recognized as a queen's dignity, and that had made all the difference.